Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We are just about ready to start. To kick things off, we're going to launch a poll. So while folks are hopping on, go ahead and answer this poll question for us. And the question is, what is the greatest impact on patient recruitment in the last few years? Is it decentralized clinical trials, AI and technology, online advertising, or access to medical records to identify eligible patients? Go ahead and let us know while you're popping on, and we will get started in just a couple of moments. And so while folks are joining, just go ahead and answer the poll for us, and we will kick that off so that we get some great feedback from y'all. And then we will introduce ourselves and kick this webinar off today. Oops, we see some responses coming in. This is great. Tell us, what is that greatest impact on patient recruitment of the last few years? And I know there's been quite a few updates and things changing, but what in your perspective has been the greatest impact? All right, we've got just a couple of moments more and then we'll end this poll. Perfect. So we'll share those results with you in just a moment after we introduce ourselves. So welcome to today's webinar hosted by Innovative Trials. I'm Leanne Wolke. I am the moderator, but also I'm going to be sharing some thoughts and insights with you. I'm the Executive Vice President of Solya, which is a company that is owned, but yet a separate operating division of Entrada Ventures Group. And we help to take that patient who's maybe curious about clinical trials and help them become confident so that they can enroll. All right, Haley, let's go to you.
Thank you, Leanne. Yes, I'm Haley Tilley, Associate Director at Innovative Trials. I work in our site support team, and we're here to support studies with their patient recruitment and patient retention. Happy to be here today.
Welcome, LaQuinta, to you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm LaQuinta Jernigan. I'm the Senior Vice President of Business Development at Monroe Biomedical Research. We are a fast-growing clinical research site network with a focus on the patient and servicing the community in which we are located at. And we have a great emphasis and an outstanding track record when it comes to not only reaching sponsors' targeted diversity goals, but also retention. So I'm very excited to be here today to talk about recruitment and retention.
Thanks so much, ladies. Great to have you here. Now, let's talk about the results of the poll. What do you think was the biggest impact? Any thoughts, any guesses? Anyone want to venture to guess what it might have been? No? All right, so here's the results, and it was close. Decentralized clinical trials was the leader with 38%, followed closely by access to medical records to identify eligible patients at 33%. AI and technology came in at 22%, and online advertising at 5%. Anybody find anything interesting about that result?
Actually, I'm surprised and actually pleasantly surprised that AI came in third in the poll. And I'm not surprised about the fact that decentralized clinical trial solutions came in top.
All right.
I think for me, I'm surprised that digital advertising came in last place. I'm sad for digital advertising. I think I see it being used effectively, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on in today's session.
Absolutely. There's some data that suggests that online advertising actually gets more patients to raise their hand to participate in a trial than some of the other techniques. So yes, it is surprising, and it's something that's used commonly across most studies. So we'll have to talk about that, and we'll dive in. In preparation for this talk, Innovative Trials put out a webinar question kind of in advance. Excuse me. And they said, what do you think will shape the future of patient recruitment the most? And the options were AI and technology, human relationships, a mix of both, or something else. And the results were, I think, what we're going to find to bear today. 58% of people said a mix of both, recognizing that perhaps it's a blended solution that will ultimately get us where we want to go. Human relationships came in at 25%. There's no denying the power of human relationships, and AI and technology at 17%. So if we think about the last 15 years, what do you feel has been the most significant unforeseen challenge in recruitment? And how did the industry adapt or fail to adapt to this?
I'm happy to take this one first of all, LaQuinta. I mean, obviously, the biggest challenge that we've faced in recent years has been the COVID pandemic. It's led to a break in the drug development pipeline, which I think we're still feeling the effects of. But back at the time, the speed of the approval process led to a huge amount of patient concern. There was a lot of misinformation that was caused by the pandemic, by the development of the vaccines. And, with the aid of various digital platforms, that misinformation was able to spread rapidly and globally. So, that was a huge challenge. I do think, though, that the pandemic led to a greater awareness of clinical trials, with patients asking questions and raising their concerns. So I think now, more than ever, there's an increasing need for transparency, and probably most importantly, patient education around trials generally, but probably also specifically for individual studies, the procedures that are involved and the commitment needed, and importantly, how their data is used.
Quenta, any thoughts? What has been the significant unforeseen challenges, and how did the industry adapt or fail to adapt?
Yeah, so I think Haley I agree with her with COVID, but I think if we take it one step further, before COVID, I think overall distrust and skepticism in the industry, in the pharmaceutical realm, amongst the public, has been a huge challenge. And that only became bigger the more we've become, used to being on social media and using technology. So people have a voice and they can voice their opinions. And I think, interestingly enough, when COVID came along, it really showed just how big that skepticism really was. And we had the opportunity through COVID, to Haley's point, to really talk about, okay, this is how we develop drugs. This is what the clinical trial process looks like. This is why this is so important. And so I think with COVID, we had so many opportunities where we were able to open up to the public, have more transparency, have more conversations around, the importance of research. But I think that where we failed was, it was like almost a trend, where, it was, everyone was really on board because it was the vaccine. It was so important for the public to understand that this is safe for you to receive, and this is how it works. But we kind of left it there. And I think that we missed a big opportunity to really dig deeper into that educational component and keep up with the transparency across, like, all the research that's being done, so that we could curb that skepticism. But I think to this day, still, that has a huge impact. It's a big challenge with recruitment that still needs to be overcome.
I completely agree. I think when we think about 15 years ago, social media didn't really even exist. It was in its infancies. And people are using social media. We know that. And I think we've seen the industry try to use social media. However, I still cringe a little bit when I see an ad saying a double-blind placebo-controlled study of, and I think, ooh, nobody's raising their hand to participate because they don't understand. So we're, as an industry, I think, trying to engage with technology and patients in that way, but we're still not conveying an empathetic presence that's available and helping to really guide those patients along the way. And that's where I think we've kind of thrown things at patients and taken more of a commodified view often, really failing to partner with patients. So that would be my my answer there. If we think about today's digital world, are we in danger of over-relying on technology in recruitment?
I certainly think that we can become blinded by the sheer volume of information and advertising that's thrown at us. You know, it's vast. You know, wherever you go, whether you're on social media platforms or whether you're streaming or watching TV, but I do think we need to be in those places. We need to be raising study awareness in the places where our potential patients are going to be. And so if that means social media or other digital advertising places, that's where we need to be. So yeah, I think we can over rely on it. We certainly don't want to overlook the importance of more traditional means of communication and advertising, as an example. So TV, radio, newspapers, because we have to be where those people are as well. I guess ultimately we can't use technology, whether it's e-diaries or websites or advertising platforms. We can't use those to an extent that we alienate individuals that aren't comfortable in those spaces or don't have access or don't trust those places.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Haley. I was just going to say the last thing you said, don't trust those places, because we absolutely need to be in the digital spaces. Absolutely. Most people are there and that's where they're getting their information. But I think that we have to also not be blind to the fact that a lot of people are turning away from some of those sources because they don't know what's real and what's not. They don't know what to believe and what not to believe. And so we have to make sure that there's a balance, that we're using more traditional forms of reaching individuals and using those digital spaces as well.
And I think it's also the trusted voices, right? So putting trusted voices out there, because on the internet, it's anyone with a megaphone can say whatever they want. And sometimes we've seen industry kind of shy away from putting their beliefs or thoughts or communication out there. We are seeing more of a trend. If you think of Lilly Direct, AbbVie also has a patient site. Pfizer has a great patient site. More pharma companies are actually creating their own patient sites to put credible information into play. Some of the work we do is working with influencers and helping them also convey the message, because people are getting the information out there. But if we're not involved in the conversation, then our voices are excluded. So I think it's important to be able to be where the patients are and to be able to be credible and to give them information that is backed by science, credible resources, and also voices and people they can trust, people that look like them, that speak the language they speak. Not many patients are talking about double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. There's a comic I saw about some guy, a little bit of a hillbilly. I live in Tennessee, I can say that. And he's out drinking a beer by his gazebo. And he said, I entered one of those clinical trials. I think I got the gazebo. and that kind of, I think, speaks to it, right? Is there's these terms that we use, placebo, gazebo. What's the difference to a patient? Maybe not a lot, but we can educate people so that they understand. And when they feel informed and we're communicating in an empathetic way that touches at the core of who they are, then they know they can trust us. But if we're speaking a different language with words they don't understand, they might think, gosh, I don't understand these words. I should understand them. If I don't, maybe I'm stupid. And if I'm stupid, then this isn't for me. So really, how do we guide that patient through? Let's talk a little bit about decentralized trials. How do we maintain that patient-physician relationship in a DCT environment?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first here, Haley. I spent a vast amount of my career working within the DCT space. And so I think that they're an amazing tool in the toolbox, but that's what it is. It's a tool. It's a tool that's to be used in conjunction with the site, making an extension of the site possible to create more pathways to clinical research, make it more convenient for patients. But that site and that relationship with the physician and the staff of that site is still absolutely key to making it work. Because if you think about it, in order to get a patient to agree and consent to have devices in their home, HCPs coming to their home, they have to understand the importance of that or why it's an option, and who are they going to get that from? They're going to get it from the study coordinator when they're at that visit. That relationship and having that trust there is what makes the DCT possible. So I've always been a firm believer that DCTs are not going to become that we're not going to become an industry of fully virtual remote trials. It just won't happen, and it cannot work. DCTs are an amazing tool to incorporate into a protocol, into a trial, to create avenues for accessibility. But again, it's just an extension of the site, and we need to really start seeing it more that way.
Yeah, I'd agree with you completely, LaQuinta. I think that patient-physician relationship, particularly in times of high public skepticism and misinformation, that kind of continuity of care, it builds familiarity, it enables the physician to share knowledge in real time to address concerns of the patients as they arise. And when the physician gives their time and their patience to a patient, it builds trust, as you said. It provides reassurance. And I guess that also extends to caregivers and to family members as well. They're an important role very often in a patient deciding to join a clinical trial and staying on that clinical trial. So, providing them with support as well, and doing that through study materials, through videos, can help outside of the face-to-face meeting that a patient might have with their physician. But ultimately, it's more of that personal touch, I think, that leads to a fully engaged patient, a trusting patient, one that's going to be likely to stay on the study for the duration.
If we think about, we've all heard that metric that costs about $6,000 to enroll a patient into an oncology trial, about $19,000 to replace a patient that's lost to follow-up. So we know the importance of maintaining a great relationship with that patient, that caregiver, that extended, decision-making entity for any individual patient. It's not just one person we're dealing with. We all know that. So what are we doing to really make that family unit or that decision-making unit feel comfortable? I know I spoke with Rob Freistadt at Uncommon Cures, and he said they have a philosophy. A lot of what they do is DCT based. However, they think about who's coming in. If it's a pediatric patient, do they have things at that level? Do they have the snacks that the family likes? Do they have the things to make that patient comfortable, that family unit comfortable, so that when they are there, they feel valued? There's a site that has a 97.5% retention rate. And I was like, what are you guys doing? And it's some of the basic things that are those human connection points that we can't neglect. People want to feel heard. They want to feel valued. They were saying sometimes the longest part of the screening process is the 45 minutes in which the patient wants to relay their personal story to their patient recruitment, caller. So really looking at, are we giving people the space? Are we helping them feel heard? Are we empathizing with them? We can't overlook that. And I think we also need to think about, are we meeting those touch points? Do we have an effective patient relationship management system where we're able to convey just the right message at the right time? So the patient thinks like, wow, they get me. Because maybe there's that moment on visit 16 where the patient's thinking, oh gosh, I don't know if I can, make the trek into the site for another screening. And if there's a message saying, this is why this is important, not only to you and your family, but to families that come after, maybe that's enough for them to refocus and recommit. We've all had those marketing messages that come across from someone and you think, wow, I was going to cancel that thing, but they just gave me such value. I'm going to keep it. So how are we adding value to the patients and the families? I think is a question we always have to ask in every interaction and everything we do, so that we're making sure we're removing friction, we're removing the bottlenecks for the patients and for the sites, but really also giving the patient valuable information so that they feel engaged. What do you think about, I think we all agree that that patient-physician relationship is so important, but with, I think it's 60% of physicians are over the age of 60, getting ready to retire. We have more nurses than ever leaving the industry or leaving nursing after COVID, and the burnout rate. I think I saw a statistic this week that said more than half of medical professionals are experiencing at least one characteristic of burnout. How do we manage and retain that relationship given burnout, given the exodus of the medical community? What do we do?
I think in my experience of working with sites and hearing what they've got to say, that they're busy, busy, and there's ever increasing demand on them to meet the recruitment targets. There's more competitive studies. Their resourcing is limited. So yeah, all that you've just said, Leanne, is real. It's what we hear as well. And I think anything that sponsors can do to support the sites rather than add to what is already a tough task, to be that person that has the time and the patience to spend with patients. You need support at the other end. So technologies like additional support with pre-screening, for example, anything that can help the sites to reduce the burden, providing them with support, providing them with encouragement and motivation to keep going towards that recruitment target, which sometimes they're pretty tough. The eligibility criteria can be quite tough to find those eligible patients. So I think providing as much support for them as possible to find patients, to get them to the site is just going to help the sites to have more time available for that personal interaction.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I think there's two things that need to happen. One, Haley, you just mentioned we need more support from sponsors, because great things can happen when there's enough support and resources put in place. I know when I joined Monroe, I was shocked to hear what our retention rate is something like 96%. And I'm like, well, what's the secret sauce behind that? Like, there must be some magic algorithm, but it really comes down to the basics of like caring for patients, providing them with a comfortable space, clear communication, and community engagement events, awareness events. And so like, if sponsors can start feeding more resources to provide the additional support sites need to make those things happen, then it would take the pressure off the sites to do that on their own, so that they have more time and more bandwidth. Because those types of, let's just take community awareness events, those types of events are huge, because again, it's taking care of what we've already talked about, educating people about the importance of clinical research, but it's also opening up, a new pool of people who are now aware of like, this is the possibility that exists with clinical research. And now I know where I can go, a trusted voice in my community where I can go to learn more. They have huge value. So having support from sponsors for some of those types of grassroots efforts would go a long ways. And the second thing I think is that we need to spread the love. There are so many sites in rural locations that have never been invited to the table to participate in clinical research. And yes, sure, they may be research naive, but we all know that there are ways that you can embed certain roles at a site to bring them up to speed quickly, but they're also trusted voices in their community. So we need to start, kind of widening the net of sites that we're considering to participate in our trials, so that we're reaching more people, but also spreading that workload across a wider pool.
And Leanne, sorry, just to step in again, you mentioned earlier on about talking to people within the community in positions of trust, and LaQuinta, you're absolutely right, going out into the communities, whether that's in the big cities, in the large towns, but also into those rural areas, to go into community locations, to go out into healthcare locations, meet with people in those positions of trust, because we need to be where our patients are, and if they're living out in rural locations, then we need to be there to enroll patients that are representative of the overall population.
Definitely. I think we all agree we need to be where the patients are. We need to remove some of the burden off the study sites. And that's, let the sites do what's really great. Get out, do those community events, meet those patients that have previously been underrepresented and not invited to the clinical trial table. But then we can look at how can we use technology to then supplement. So maybe you make that personal connection, but then maybe there's a way that technology can help to educate the patient afterwards. I think that's where we're seeing this blend, and that's even the initial poll showed that this blend of AI and human relationships is where the secret sauce is. Because sites are burdened. If we just throw more patients at a site, we've heard from sites feeling like they're drowning because they're getting patients that are interested now, but they don't qualify. So I think the trick is to get the patients that are truly confident they know what a clinical trial is, they're ready to participate, and they actually, have gone through a pre-screener, probably online, to be able to participate. So let's switch gears a little bit. We've talked about AI some, but as AI becomes dominant in patient recruitment, what are the potential ethical dilemmas and biases we need to proactively address, if any?
Well, I can go start here, then I'll hand it over to Haley. I think that, when we talk about AI, there's a lot of hype right around AI. We've been talking about it at conferences for years, and there's a lot of really great use cases for AI, but we have to look at the facts. I mean, there's already been $1 trillion spent in this space, not to mention the huge environmental impact that it causes. And we still haven't solved some of the problems that lead to biases, such as hallucinations, right? This has been around for a couple of years now, AI hallucinations. It's not gotten any better. And that's really concerning for our space, because as they try to improve it, it's getting worse. And it's almost, AI starting to really predict what you want to hear, what answer you want. And so that's going to create biases. And we have to be careful as business leaders in this space that when we're incorporating AI into our strategies, that we know that can happen, because we can't have biases in our line of work. So I think that there's no solution for it right now. And that's why I feel that for me, there's a lot of hesitancy for or concern for how we're utilizing it, because it isn't still there. The problems that exist with AI haven't gone away. So while it can be a useful tool, I think it's very important that we realize that it requires humans to apply critical thinking, because it does not have that ability. So while we're utilizing it, we need to make sure that we have all the wonderful forces in our industries, our KOLs, our researchers, our scientists, applying that critical thinking to what AI is giving out. We can make sure that the information we're getting is accurate and that there aren't any preconceived biases in there.
Yeah, I'd agree with you in terms of it's not there yet. The trust isn't there, and if we can't trust it, then the applications that are starting to become available for this industry are not going to be taken up. There's a lot of concern about data protection, and I think GDPR came in as mandatory compliance about 7 or 8 years ago, and AI comes into that, and that's completely different to those regulations that have been put in place already. A whole different level of considerations to have. So I think in terms of informed consent and how patient data is going to be used, the safety of their data is a big consideration for any patient that's engaging with anything AI that's ultimately going to lead them into a clinical trial. You know, it's already quite a potentially stressful or anxious moment when a patient decides to engage with a clinical trial, and then throw on top of that any concerns that they have about using AI in order to access it. I think that just you know, adds on to that anxiety.
I think AI can be used effectively. And some of the ways that we've seen it be used effectively, if we looking at electronic health records, right? And looking for those patients to ensure that patients actually meet the inclusion, exclusion criteria. There was a study at Vanderbilt, and a company has kind of sprung out of there, that reduced the amount of time it took to cull through those medical records, and something that used to cost $100 an hour is now pennies. And they're able to identify those patients much faster. So we know that. We use AI to be able to have the patient connect and get some basic information about clinical trials and understand, right, before going to a site. But the important thing is the guardrails, right? So kind of like if you're learning to bowl and those guardrails come down so that you don't get into the gutter, you don't make a mistake. AI is only as good as the data that it's trained on. And if you have something that is just trained on everything out there, you're getting some garbage. So it's important to have AI models that are trained on accurate, reliable data, and that can get smarter, right? So that the AI is monitored by a parent, right? So that you've got someone looking after it, not letting it just go wild. It would be like a teenager going wild on spring break. You need to make sure that you do have those guardrails to be able to ensure that the information the AI is giving is accurate. And that's where I think, you know, if someone just puts something on one of the commonly readily available platforms out there for AI, you don't know what you're going to get. I wouldn't ask it to write a legal document for me necessarily without someone looking at it. Because there are those hallucinations. There are things that it kind of gets wild and goes off the rails, but used effectively, I think it can reduce time for study coordinators. I think it can increase access for patients. Imagine if a patient is looking for a clinical trial, and instead of only typing one part of a term that clinicaltrials.gov only recognizes it if it's the exact match, that if AI could actually realize that non-small cell lung cancer is the same as NSCLC, which sometimes if they're in there differently, then it doesn't find the study. And if it could take that trial and put it in simple language, that would be powerful. That might allow someone who was reluctant to become confident. It might allow people to feel like, hey, they get me, and let me ask questions. Let me see if this is for me, because I need to have some level of comfort before I engage in this thing that could be scary. A clinical trial could be scary and unknown. And if someone doesn't have the resources or knowledge, they may be reluctant. And I think that's why we see only 8% of the people that are ever, you know, invited to participate, because physicians think, I don't have 45 minutes to explain it to this lady, and she asked a lot of questions already. But if we could utilize AI to be able to identify the patients, give them some basic knowledge, and help guide that process, I think that would be useful. All right, there's my soapbox. Let's talk about access. You know, we do have the digital divide. Some have access, some don't have access. How do we overcome that? Because we see that with both decentralized clinical trials and AI and any other technology solution that we bring into the mix.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we're never going to not have that as a problem, because we live in a world where there are people who just will not have access to these things and don't. And that does not mean that they should not be able to participate in a clinical trial. So I don't think that we're going to be able to solve that. But I think, like what we've been saying for this, you know, this entire session, is that we have to make sure that we're incorporating other tools and other ways that patients can understand and find out about the clinical trial, because there's always going to be that divide. There's always going to be a group of people who just don't have access to technology, a group of people who aren't going to be comfortable with utilizing AI platforms, but we still need to reach them. So we're going to have to use tools of old along with tools of new, and we're not going to be able to, we can't just stop improving the tools of old because the new tools are here, because we have to have both, and they both have to be really great and work efficiently in order to reach the most people.
Haley, any thoughts on that? Let's start the poll too while we finish up this question. The next poll, folks, it's going to pop up in just a minute. What will be your patient recruitment and retention focus in the next 2 years? So answer that one. Well, Haley, take it away.
Really, just to say the same, it's providing that whole range, isn't it? Whether it's, the materials in paper form, whether it's the materials in digital format, whether it's, being on social media platforms, whether it's having videos that are visual, that have captions, that are translated into, every language that is needed. Making sure that imagery, for example, is representative of the people that you're aiming it at. It just needs a nice range of materials available. And right back at the very start, you talked about layman's terms. When you're on a pediatric study, for example, having things that are focused at the children themselves, guiding them through a blood draw and what they should expect. It's all about, providing the means for whoever it is, whatever age, wherever they live, whatever their background, to be able to say, yes, I choose to consider taking part in this clinical trial. I've been given the opportunity. To exclude anybody is it's missing out on a whole patient pool, but it doesn't have that fairness, that equality to it, to deny certain patients the opportunity to consider it.
Comes back to this blended approach again, doesn't it? I
Yeah.
think it's really understanding, what do patients want? Because if we make an assumption that older patients don't want digital forms, or younger patients only want digital forms, or people with multiple myeloma only want this, or people with lung cancer only want, then we miss out. We miss out in thinking that, well, maybe rural farmers won't participate, or different groups that have been underserved won't participate. We really need to, it comes down to connecting with patients, understanding the patient journey. What are their vulnerable moments and those choice points along the way, listening to what the patients tell us, and then beginning to have a wide variety of ways in which we communicate, ways in which we connect, because it's that communication and connection that I think is key, and that we give people choice. There was a patient that had non-small cell lung cancer. She got a call from her physician, and the physician said, all right, you've got lung cancer. Here are your options. Rattled off 5 things. This is an individual with a complex medical history, and she's not auditory. So she said, I don't know, standard of care, because she had to decide in that moment, boom, on the phone. Mm-hmm. And about a year later, I talked to her. She was cured, thankfully. And she said, I wonder if I made a mistake not going with the trial. So my hope is that every patient feel that they made the right decision for them, whether they're in a trial, whether they're on standard of care, whatever they do, but that they understand truly, and they make a choice that works for them, their care team, their family, and all of it. And the only way we can do that really is if people have information in an understandable way and communicate in a way that suits them in different modalities, video, written, auditory, in all the different ways. Now, let's think about our poll here. The audience has spoken. What will your patient recruitment and retention focus be in the next 2 years? 38% said boots on the ground, community outreach, patient advisory groups, site support, etc. 30% said digital advertising. 23% said use of medical records. 7% said AI and technology. and nobody said traditional media. So interesting. Interesting. Thanks all for your action there on the polls. If you have questions, we're going to get ready for some questions in a few minutes. Go ahead and post those in the questions pane on your site there. We've got a couple already coming in that we'll share. Let's go to this one. How can the industry address the persistent challenges of underrepresentation and lack of diversity in clinical trial participation?
I can take that one. Oh, wow. we've been trying to address this for quite some time. And I will say again, going back to COVID, this horrible thing that happened that created so many blossoms, right, out of it. But there was a huge, push for addressing this when COVID happened. And, we had the FDA guidance that came through, which was a huge win. And so I think that what we need to remember, though, is that in order to address that issue, we need to make sure that there are trusted voices that are out there in communities to increase diversity. So it's one thing to have the desire as an organization that we want our trials to be diverse and have the guidance from FDA, but then we need to put those ideas and those desires into practice. And so what I mean by that is, we talked about making sure we're utilizing sites that meet all of those different demands and diversity, right? So we want to make sure we're using a wide variety of sites that are in locations where diverse populations are represented, because people tend to want to get their information or trust people that are like them. Okay, so in order to build your diversity, there needs to be, those positions represented in your trial. But also, what we talked about earlier again, in working with these grassroots organizations that are in communities. I think, Leanne, you said utilizing influencers. Who are the voices that these populations are listening to? Understanding these populations, right? Understanding and having, advocates within those populations that can, guide you, and who those influencers are going to be, who those trusted voices are. But it is something that's going to take outreach and working with various organizations to accomplish, and not something that you can just do on your own through corporate guidances and SOPs. It's a grassroots effort. It can be done, though. It absolutely can be done. And there's a lot of great case studies out there with trials that have absolutely nailed it. But those sponsors are utilizing some of these lesser used practices to reach those goals.
And I'd just add on to that, you mentioned with global guidance on diversity. I think building a diversity plan into every trial and adoption of that plan by every site from a very early stage is really important. In my experience, I quite often see almost like, we need to talk about diversity partway through the recruitment phase, and it's not too late, but it should have been done right from the very start, so that everything that's built into the protocol, the materials that are developed, the strategies that are employed, the outreach that our lovely audience has said is the biggest thing in the next 2 years. Building those in right from the very start, rather than partway through, and it becomes like a tick box exercise. We mustn't forget diversity. No, you mustn't forget diversity. You must remember it from the very beginning, and what that means for that specific trial. Is it race and ethnicity that's important for this trial, for this drug that you're developing, but also, are we reaching, going back to that point of giving everybody the opportunity to take part in a trial? Are we reaching the various socioeconomic backgrounds, people with disabilities? All of those need to be taken into consideration from the very start.
There was a study I heard of, and they had the consent that the patient had to read. It was black text on white background, and patients were visually impaired, and they wanted to address. They said, "How are we going to handle the consent?" And they said, "Oh, well, we're going to read it to them." Patients didn't want to be read the consent. They wanted to answer the consent, and they wanted to to do it the same way anyone else was. All that had to be done is the text and the background had to be switched. They needed a black background with white text and they could read it just fine. So are we thinking we know how to solve the issue without asking? And I think that that's a big point, is really understanding the patients and getting what they need based on what they're communicating to us, not just, oh, I know what they need, because that actually creates a break in rapport and a lack of trust, which is the opposite of what we're trying to reach. So again, I think super important to be able to sometimes just ask. And in that asking, you were able to get the answers that we seek. One of the questions that's come in was, we had some great questions. So thanks all. You guys were amazing with the questions. If we don't get to them all, we will follow up. There was a question about, how do you teach HCPs empathy and compassion without being offensive to these overworked, busy providers who already are helping the industry to begin with?
That's a hard question.
Yeah, it is.
We wouldn't start with the easy one, ladies. Come on.
I mean, I think that there's the burnout component that I'm struggling with, because there are lots of tools and resources and like training sessions that you can use to really, hone in on the importance of listening and empathy and compassion. But I think that, I mean, as cliche as it sounds, like you have to start by showing that, like you have to walk the walk and talk the talk, right? So organizations need to find ways to create space for that learning. And I'm trying to address the burnout component too, because it's going to be impossible to have a workshop on empathy when your staff are burned out, because is he being very empathetic when you're doing that? Right. Not really. So you got to practice what you preach. And so we've got to find ways and pathways and avenues where we can create space for that. I know it's very hard with as busy as our site staff are, but if there are ways where we can start to incorporate, hours that are available for this type of training, maybe a wellness day here and there. But the first thing you have to tackle is the burnout, and then you can implement the discussion and the training around compassion, empathy, and listening. Because otherwise, if your staff is really burned out and then you come to them and you're like, okay, now let's do this, they're going to be like, well, you clearly aren't listening to me. You don't have any empathy towards my feelings. And it's just going to cause resentment, and none of that training is going to be absorbed. So it's a hard question, and that was a very convoluted answer, but you have to be able to create space for that type of behavior change.
Great answer. I think the thing that you said a couple times in there was space. And sometimes it's just giving space. It's pausing for a beat without rushing in with our agenda of, oh, we have to jam this empathy training down their throat. And maybe the empathy is just, hey, how are you? Yeah. And then pause and then looking for how we can help our practitioners feel seen, heard, etc. See if we have time for one more question, and then we will answer some of these other questions in a follow-up. We can do that. So many great questions. Any advice on reaching patients with rare disease, especially when there's competition for this relatively small pool of patients?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I think when it's rare disease, it takes longer. It takes time. It takes patience, and keeping sites motivated so that they don't get despondent about not finding that one patient in hundreds, in thousands, is really important. And there's some methods that would work on a high enrolling study that just don't work, just not as appropriate on rare disease studies. So I think when you do have a rare disease study, I think you have to be creative about how you're looking for your patients and then how you're engaging with those patients. it's one thing to identify, but then once you've identified some potential patients, it's so important to then successfully enroll them. So guiding sites with best practices, sharing that between sites. If people have got strategies that are effective in one site in one country, well, then they may be applicable elsewhere. So for example, when you look at reaching out to patients like that, you're, I don't know, thinking about where they are. So patient advocacy groups, I think, is a good place to start in terms of reaching patients of that therapy area, but then approaching them and contacting them in a way that provides them with that support to understand the study, understand what the commitment is, what's available for them to make that journey through the study as easy as possible. So yeah, it's challenging, and it has to be thought of in a different way to those high enrolling studies.
I think that, one of the things that we see is rare disease patients are typically more active than others in finding solutions. We've seen, parents of kids diagnosed with rare diseases, and with the personalization of medicine and more genetic testing, we're seeing more and more rare diseases. There may be a condition with 12 patients in the world. And what's happening is now with groups like Citizen Health is pooling data so that researchers can go to them and can have access to this de-identified data of patients with this rare disease. So I think that that's a really positive thing. And you can read about Nasha Ritter's story. Amazing. She was a mom whose daughter had FOXG1 mutation and started a nonprofit. She now has raised tons of money and is really rethinking drug development and looking at, instead of years and millions of dollars, how can we get that cost down? And she's doing some great work. So I think when we begin to think about, maybe we need to break away from the way we've always done it and be willing to say, like, I don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to try. And I think in our industry, we like a lot of certainty. We love our data and we love to have proof that it's going to work. But in some of these areas, we need to almost approach it, I think, from a place of curiosity, in a place of, let's see what happens. Not, of course, in a, like, let's see what happens in a safety perspective, but let's see what happens if we reach out to patients in this new way. Let's see what happens if we approach med students and train them how to be clinical researchers. So really looking at things differently. When we ask a different question, we're going to get a different answer. And so I'm going to challenge all of us to kind of rethink the questions that we're asking. One of the questions that our audience said is, it seems like you all agree on a blended approach, but how do we get industry to buy into that? And so I would ask you both, how do we get industry to buy into this blended approach, a blended solution? What would your thoughts be?
Well, I think one of the huge benefits of, greater technology inputting into our clinical trials is the ability to analyze the data. And I think you can't argue with the data. And I think when we track successes of, technology-driven processes versus more traditional, you can then share those real life examples, real life feedback, in-person personal feedback that you might get from traditional interactions, and then number of clicks, traffic driven to a website. You can provide that data, and I think that's the point at which there's no argument then, is there? It's there.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Through tried and true examples, You know, like Leanne said, this industry loves data. So if you can show, and there are people, there are companies and organizations out there that are using a blended approach, and they're having a lot of success, and we need those success stories to rise to the top, and that data shown so that more people buy into it. Because if the data is there, they will follow. So I think that's what our job is to really bring those stories up to the surface.
It's going to be my new favorite quote. If the data's there, they will follow. The field of dreams for scientists. It's perfect. So I have a question for you both. Imagine patient recruitment 15 years from now. What do you see?
I think we can't shy away from AI. It's going to be here. It is going to be here. And I would like to think that in 15 years from now, it looks very different to how it does already. I think we've seen, in kind of more day-to-day examples of where AI has improved. It has got so much better, note taking. It's so much more reliable and effective. So I think in 15 years time that's going to look a lot better. And in that time, the trust will have been built up, to enable that to develop further. For me, anything that supports the sites, that reduces their burden, that makes clinical trials more accessible for patients, more interesting for patients, safer for them. So I don't know. I recently had a blood monitor to monitor my glucose levels. Wouldn't it be amazing if we can have something that just did a whole lot more than that, and patients don't have to be going in and out all the time? You get that real-time data. You can respond quicker, earlier diagnosis. Let's have some of that.
There's some technology that's like a facial scan, and it gives you all kinds of metrics. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. Let's have that on the high street.
Yep.
Yeah.
What about you, LaQuinta?
Well,
15 years from now, what do we see?
I agree with Haley. I mean, I think since you took the tech and AI one, which I agree with 100%, I will go a different direction just to give us variety. I hope that 15 years from now, like where the three of us are invited back on this webinar, and instead of talking about how we need to do more for educating the public about clinical research, we're talking about how we're tweaking the current process or the strategy that's already in place. Because I really hope in the next 15 years, we're improving recruitment by, I don't know, maybe all the sponsors and solution providers and CROs come together to form a, clinical research education coalition. And, we have some sort of, campaign that's out there that is the only focus is to raise awareness of clinical research. And, we plant that, we embed that in so many different areas, whether it's in schools, I don't know, maybe it's the commercial that plays before your HBO Max show comes on, to save you from seeing further ads. Whatever it looks like, we come together to find a way to really push this narrative. So in 15 years from now, when we're talking about this, we're saying, wow, look how far we've come. Look how much easier it is to recruit because of the educational programs we've put in place. And maybe we can make some tweaks in the future, but we just kind of can look back at that success. So that's my wish for where we are 15 years from now.
Awesome. My wish is that every person working in the industry, at the least, has participated in a clinical trial, and that they've taken that firsthand knowledge and they've put it into the work that they're doing. Mm-hmm. They've put themselves in the patient's shoes. Anyone that takes a prescription should do a clinical trial, because someone did a clinical trial so that they could get that prescription safely. And when I think that we normalize clinical trials and we talk about them and we have tools and resources, so maybe while you're waiting at CVS or Walgreens or wherever you're getting a prescription, there's a kiosk where you can ask questions about clinical trials. And you can have them answered, like, hey, did you know that someone participated in a clinical trial so that you could get your whatever drug? And maybe even right then, it's like, hey, would you ever want to participate in a clinical trial? Yes or no? If so, you could safely store your information. Thinking beyond, how can we reach people and almost make it the people are driving the process. That would be exciting to me.
That would be.
So thank you both for your time. Thank you to our audience for your time and your brilliant questions. We appreciate them. I apologize we didn't get to them all. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out. We are all on LinkedIn and can be found a variety of different ways. And we love these conversations. I think I can speak for all of us. And together, I think we're all committed to really trying to engage patients in a meaningful way to reach more diverse patients and to lessen the burden on investigators and study sites and all of us in the process, right? Any parting words, ladies, as we sign off here?
It's been great to
No,
have this conversation and to have you host and guide us through it, Leanne.
Thanks so much. All right,
yeah,
everyone.
this has been a great conversation. Thank you.
You are very welcome. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to crossing paths soon. Bye for now.